Good morning, students. Let's start with the further discussion of the chapter Acids, Bases and Salts. In our previous class, we have completed pH scale, universal indicator and importance of pH. In our today's lecture, we are going to start with the next part of the chapter, that is salts, and in that we will do definition of salt and types of salts. Let us start with the topic salts, but before doing its definition, let us take example of salts like sodium chloride, sodium sulfate, sodium hydrogen sulfate. And let us discuss first about sodium chloride, that how it is formed. So take a compound in which sodium is present, for example sodium hydroxide, and a compound in which chlorine is present, that is HCl. When these two compounds react together, they form sodium chloride, and water molecule is also formed along with sodium chloride. But how this is formed? Basically, the hydrogen of the acid is replaced by the metallic ion like sodium. Okay, so if here instead of sodium, if it is potassium, then it will form KCl. So what is happening here? The hydrogen ion of the acid is replaced by the metallic ion of the another compound which we have taken. Now for the second one, that is sodium sulfate, and the next one sodium hydrogen sulfate. First let us see that the sulfate which is there in this salt SO4, and in this one hydrogen sulfate. This particular anion we will get only when we are reacting it with sulfuric acid. Similarly, we can see here when we want chlorine in a compound, we use the acid in which Cl is present. Similarly, if we want in a salt SO4 and HSO4, we have to use sulfuric acid. Now, when we talk about sulfuric acid ionizes in two steps. In the first step, it forms HSO4 negative ion along with hydronium ion. This hydrogen sulfate anion which is formed, it further ionize and form hydronium and a sulfate ion. So if HSO4 is formed as an anion, then we will get this salt, and if sulfate is formed, then we will get sodium sulfate. We can change sodium, means the metallic ion, as we select the another compound. But ionization of sulfuric acid and formation of compound here will depend upon the temperature as well. So if we want a compound to contain HSO4, we should keep the temperature below 200 degrees Celsius, and if we want a compound to contain sulfate, we need to keep the temperature above 200 degrees Celsius. So let us take an example in which we are preparing sodium sulfate. So to prepare sodium sulfate, we need to react sulfuric acid with sodium hydroxide. Why sodium hydroxide? Because our compound which we have made, it contains sodium. So that part we will take. Now in this case, hydrogen ion of the acid is replaced by the metallic ion. And while taking the another example, formation of sodium hydrogen sulfate, what we are taking here is NaOH as the reactant along with sulfuric acid. But here we will keep the temperature below 200 degrees Celsius so that sodium hydrogen sulfate is formed. So now we are ready to define salts. So how can we define salts? Salt is a compound formed by partial or total replacement of the ionizable hydrogen atoms of an acid by a metallic ion or an ammonium ion. Partial means incomplete. So we can consider the first reaction. In this it is incomplete, and in this it is complete replacement. The two examples we have already discussed. Now let us discuss the ionic definition of the salt. Salt is an ionic compound which dissociates in water to yield a positive ion other than hydrogen ion and a negative ion other than hydroxyl ion. For example, sodium chloride. Sodium is a metal, chlorine is a non-metal. So what are ionic compounds? Ionic compounds are the compounds formed by transfer of electron between a metal and a non-metal. So when sodium chloride in presence of water, when it dissolves, it dissociates into sodium ion and chloride ion. Let us consider more examples of salt. For example, sodium sulfate, copper sulfate, sodium hydrogen carbonate or sodium bicarbonate, sodium dihydrogen phosphate, basic lead chloride, bleaching powder, potash alum, sodium potassium carbonate, sodium argentocyanide. Now, when we are looking at these examples, what we can find here is some salts are containing hydrogen, some are not containing hydrogen, some are containing OH in their particular compound. OH represents bases, remember that. OCl, Cl in bleaching powder, that means there are two anions here. When we talk about potash alum, there are two salts. So, potassium sulfate, aluminium sulfate. Sodium potassium carbonate, in this particularly two cations are present, and when we talk about this, it is a complex ion. So on the basis of this, there are different types of salts. So salts can be classified into normal salts, acid salts, basic salts, double salts, mixed salts and complex salts. What are normal salts? Let us first consider that. Normal salts are the salts formed by the complete replacement of the ionizable hydrogen atoms of an acid by a metallic or an ammonium ion. For example, we can see HCl plus NaOH. In this, complete replacement of hydrogen is done with the metallic ion and we are getting sodium chloride and water. Similarly, we can take an example of another one, that is sodium sulfate also. In that, from sulfuric acid, completely both the hydrogens are replaced. So that can be also considered as one of the examples, like sodium sulfate and copper sulfate. They are normal salts because here no hydrogen is present. The next one is acid salt. So what are acid salts? An acid salt is obtained by the partial replacement of the ionizable hydrogen atoms by metal ions or ammonium ions. So there is a partial replacement of the ionizable hydrogen atoms. For example, NaHCO3, NaH2PO4, the salts which contain hydrogen in their compound, they are acid salts. So for example, sodium hydrogen sulfate, below 200 degrees Celsius, when we react sodium hydroxide with sulfuric acid, we will get sodium hydrogen sulfate. Now the next one is basic salt. Basic salts are formed by partial replacement of hydroxyl group of a di or a triacidic base by an acid radical. Supposing it is MgOH whole twice. So there are two hydroxides. So partial replacement, that means only one will be replaced. So for example, PbOH whole twice, when it reacts with HCl, lead hydroxide, when it reacts with HCl, there is partial replacement and it will form PbOHCl, that is basic lead chloride plus water. The next one is double salts. So how double salts are formed? Double salts are formed by the union of two simple salts that dissolve in water and crystallize. That means we will evaporate, and there is a procedure which is followed, that is crystallization. For example, potassium sulfate, aluminium sulfate, they react with in presence of water, they are dissolved, they are crystallized. So when after doing the recrystallization, what we get is potassium sulfate, double salt is formed basically, and that salt is known as potash alum. The next one is mixed salts. Salts that contain more than one acid radical or basic radical are called as mixed salts. For example, in bleaching powder, two acid radicals are present, and in sodium potassium carbonate, two cations, that is basic radical is present. Other name of cation, that is positive ion, is basic radical. Other name of anion, that is negatively charged ion, is acid radical. So in a salt in which two or more than two are present, then it is known as a mixed salt. Next one is complex salt. Complex salts dissociate in water to give one simple ion and one complex ion. For example, when sodium argentocyanide dissolves in water, sodium, the counter ion, the outside ion, which is ionization ion which is present, it will be simple ion, and the another one, the complex species which is there, it will remain intact, and that is known as a complex ion. Now, according to today's lecture, there are some questions which are flashing on your screen. You can solve these questions with the help of today's lecture.